Hello friends and welcome back to Chess with Konstantin. Today it is my great pleasure to share with you one of my older games, a game in which I used a very simple endgame trick to have a draw with a master level player as a small child rated only 1400. In fact, after this game was over, my opponent was so disgusted with his performance that he not only had to quit the tournament, he also quit playing chess for quite a few years. And if that doesn't tell you how nasty this trick is, I don't know what will. So if you would like to skip straight to the endgame trick, I will put a link directly in the video description, so you can click that timestamp. Otherwise, if you want to go through the opening stages of the game, it is a rather long one, but the game does involve one of my favorite opening lines that it could have gone into, which is the Frankenstein-Dracula variation. And if you've seen any of my previous videos on the Vienna game, you will recognize that name and the exciting nature of the line. So let us jump straight into the action. The master, my opponent, was playing white pieces and he played pawn to e4. Here I thought for a little while and decided to choose an unorthodox opening choice of knight to f6. This is the Alekhine's defense, and it's a rather obscure opening that is not very popular, the reason why it's not very popular is because white can gain quite a lot of space. For example, pawn to e5, knight d5, now you can push d4 or c4, and basically you're allowing your opponent to occupy the center. The opening is a little bit tricky and actually does get played at the master level sometimes as black. And maybe my opponent, well, I'm quite certain he didn't know any of the theory behind this opening. But what he didn't know is that I also didn't know any theory of this opening. I just wanted to make him uncomfortable. So he decided, rather than gaining an immediate advantage with pawn to e5, as he should have done, he decided to play it safe and played knight to c3. And of course this actually played right into my hands, because I loved playing the Vienna game. That was my favorite opening of all time, and actually still is. So I played e5. And now notice it's as if we played d4, e5, knight c3, and knight f6. So we transposed right into it, and he played now bishop to c4. Now please note, as I mentioned in my earlier videos, it is possible actually to capture the pawn on e4 right away with the knight, which is what I did here. And it is possible for white to recapture this knight. It looks like a knight sacrifice. However, it is not. If white takes on e4 here, then black can play d5 right away. And after the standard response of bishop d3 and capturing the knight, bishop takes a pawn. Here, after f5, actually, it is black that is playing for the win. And of course, I knew that. And my opponent also knew that, or likely could see it, which is why he did not capture this knight, allowing the fork. Instead, he played a much more dangerous move, which is queen to h5. Any of you enthusiasts of the scholar's mate, the three-move checkmate, know this formation and can recognize it. So here, if black does nothing, for example, black decides to capture the knight, then simply white will checkmate the black's king. Also, the knight is hanging, so you have to do something with this knight, otherwise you're going to lose it. And I played the best defensive move in this position. I played knight to d6. Notice this knight move defends the pawn on f7 and also attacks the bishop on c4. So the ordinary response here for people who know what they're doing as white, know the theory, would be to play bishop to b3. After this, black will play a developing move, knight c6. And now white begins a series of unrelenting attacks going straight for the kill. So here, this is why it's called the Frankenstein-Dracula variation. The commentator who invented this name said that it's as if watching two monsters play chess, both of which just unrelantedly attack and none of which cares about defending. So white plays knight to b5. Notice that it is not possible to capture the knight. If black plays knight b5, then this is checkmate. Because remember, this knight is defending the f7 pawn. And the threat here, of course, is that white can capture this knight, and after either bishop or pawn takes, then this will be checkmate. So the standard response here is to play pawn to g6, blocking this diagonal and attacking white's queen. However, this does not stop the attack. Here white can play queen to f3 with the same checkmate threat. And after pawn to f5, blocking that avenue of attack, the queen comes to d5 with the same threat, capturing the knight followed by checkmate. So why black does the only defense that he can, which is well, okay, black can play either queen e7 or queen f6, with queen f6 being slightly better. But now white will play knight takes c7 with check, and after king d8, white captures this rook on a8. So you may be wondering now in this position, why would black ever choose to play such a ridiculous opening, right? So black is already a rook down. Well, believe it or not, no matter what the chess engine is saying here, in fact, it is black that has the better winning chances in this position. So this game is going to continue pawn to b6. Black's light squared bishop will be very aggressively developed on b7 and will be supported by this knight. The other bishop will be very aggressively developed to g7. The rook will come somewhere in the middle. And actually it is black that will be playing for the win here, and it is white that will be attempting to draw, and I would note with great difficulty, because actually white would have to work for the draw here. So I mean, we can do a piece analyzing these lines in much more detail later on if you're interested. But you know, this is a line that I was thinking of when I got into this position. And after I played knight to d6, my opponent surprised me by playing a seemingly pretty ridiculous move. Queen takes e5 check. The reason why that's not a good move is because after queen to e7, this queen is actually pinned, and white will have no choice but to exchange queens, and the resulting positions, it will be very drawish. So I was very surprised that a master level player would play this variation, because I mean, this is like making yourself work hard for no reason. I mean, when you are playing an opponent that's much weaker than you should play positions that are as complicated as possible, because they will make the mistake first. And then you're going to take advantage of their mistakes and win. But if you simplify the position and take away the heavy pieces, the queens, the rooks, and trade down to an endgame, it is that much more likely that they're going to draw. So I was very surprised. But now I will go through the game very quickly. The rest of the next 40-something moves were played with nothing special happening. We simply traded off queens and then moved the pieces around a bit. Nothing special is happening here. I tried to gain some space. He pushed me back. Here there was a maneuver that successfully created double pawns. for black, but it's still pretty equal nevertheless. So after all this occurred, I would note that here the position is dead equal, and actually if I were to play like rook to b8, then actually black is slightly better here. But you know, I was only 1400 back then, I wasn't that good. So instead of playing rook to b8, I played check here, just traded down all the pieces, and this is really well, if you look at this endgame, then white is slightly better, but it's still very drawable. So another 15 or so moves go by, and in this position black is down a pawn, so white is finally winning. So we reach this position. Notice that the bishop is much more active than the knight, and in fact white managed to push my knight further back to a2. So in this position white should be completely winning, but my opponent was not aware of a simple trick that allowed me to draw this game against all odds. And the game continued like this: g5 check, takes, and he made the mistake, he took with the wrong pawn. So here, if white were to capture with h, it's a complete win and there is nothing black can do. But my opponent blundered by capturing with the f-pawn. And the reason why now it is possible to draw is because of a scenario called the wrong covered bishop. So the wrong covered bishop means that this bishop is the wrong cover and cannot support the queening of the pawn. So after I played king to g7, just imagine if I were to sacrifice this knight for this pawn somehow, and this h-pawn was the only pawn that's left. It's actually impossible for white to make progress. The king could shuffle between these squares, and the pawn, no matter how far it advances, it could never queen, because the king will always be in the way, and they will either be stalemate, or you're going to somehow capture that pawn and it will be a draw anyway. So the game continued: king to e7, knight c3, bishop c6. It's actually a blunder. Bishop f6 was f3 was better. Knight to e2, and now the knight makes it to f4, and here knight to h3, attacking the g5 pawn. My opponent gave the check to h6, but after king to h8, capturing my pawn is impossible because it runs into this check. And after king to f6, then simply knight takes g5. And after king takes g5, it doesn't really matter what I play, and this pawn actually doesn't even matter anymore. So I just played f5, and the opponent agreed to a draw. The idea being that it doesn't matter what is played here. If captured, then just move straight, and you just shuffle in between these squares, and it's impossible to ever make progress here. I mean, it doesn't really matter. Now if king h6 is stalemate, there's no way to make progress here. This is stalemate. And if king goes back, then king g7. So this, ladies and gentlemen, is the trick called the wrong covered bishop, and it's very important to know this trick. If you end up in a losing endgame and your opponent has a bishop, you can always see if it's the right cover to advance the pawn, and if it's the wrong cover, just get your king to the corner. And it doesn't matter if your opponent is a master and you're simply a 1400 level kid, your opponent will never be able to make progress. Well, that's all I wanted to teach for the day. I hope you enjoyed this little endgame shuffle, and Constantine out.